Hello, everyone. My name is Rishika Porandla, and I am the founder and director of Spacetime Archives, which is an educational outreach nonprofit based in Dallas, aiming to provide unique STEM learning opportunities and resources to underserved youth, especially in our niche of astronomy and aerospace education. Spacetime Archives is currently running a project called And Then There Were 10, the testimonies of 10 women fighting for educational equity, which is an interview series highlighting the untold stories of 10 women who are at the forefront of social justice and educational atmosphere. On that note, let me introduce one of those brilliant women, LaShawn Routé Chatmon. LaShawn is the executive director of the National Equity Project, but beyond that title, she's a visionary leader and a change maker, dedicated to empowering communities and fostering social impact. With a passion for education and equitable opportunities, she campaigns for the advancement of underserved youth and marginalized voices. Today, we'll learn a little bit more about her background and her work for social justice with questions submitted nationwide from Spacetime Archive students. So I'll let LaShawn get into a little bit of an introduction for herself.
Well, good morning, and thank you for that beautiful introduction, Rishika. I am LaShawn Routé Chatmon, the Executive Director of National Equity Project, the founding Executive Director of National Equity Project, which is an organization that transitioned from or grew out of the Bay Area Coalition for Equitable Schools. And we are headquartered here in Oakland, California. We are a 27-year-old organization.
So that's great. You mentioned that there was a transition into the National Equity Project from a previous organization. So could you share with us the most significant obstacles you faced during that transition and how you navigated them?
Yeah, it actually was more of a beautiful story than an obstacle. We were founded in 1995 as one of the regional centers of the Coalition for Essential Schools, which was a school reform organization kind of born out of the late 80s, early 90s, that founded the 10 Common Principles. And BASIS, we were affectionately known as, was one of the regional centers among many that were doing that national work, trying to actually support schools to live, to manifest and operationalize the 10 Common Principles: student as learner, equity and democracy. So there were principles like those that we were trying to support schools to kind of organize their teaching and learning around. And the executive director, at that time, Steve Jubb, who was the executive director when I entered the organization in 2000, was retiring. And it was a bit of an unusual transition, but not a challenging one, in that he, along with the board, were in agreement to name me as the successor of the organization. And then 2 years later, and we had, as BASIS, we had done a lot of regional work. We were the Bay Area Coalition for Equitable Schools, and we had supported for more than 10 years a small school and new school movement that was here in Oakland, in Emeryville, and in Berkeley, California, which were the three regions that we worked with over that period of time. And as that movement began to sunset, we began doing national work, and had investment to actually expand our work and develop what is now our Leading for Equity framework. And so we found ourselves in places like Florida and in places like, which feels slightly ironic right now, but found ourselves in places like Florida, and in cities in Michigan and in the South. And so we literally just outgrew our name. We were no longer just working in the Bay Area. We were no longer just working with schools. And so we transitioned from the Bay Area Coalition for Equitable Schools to the National Equity Project, because we had expanded both our reach and our footprint, and we're working with more clients than just schools. And so it was kind of a natural evolution that we shifted our name. And we've been continuing to evolve ever since.
That's very interesting. And it's something that I've seen everyone have different experiences with because recently I was interviewing a deputy associate administrator at NASA, and she was describing how a transition was actually very rough for her. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to see how it differs based on the organization. So
Yeah,
I
the context and the period, right? The context and the period, all of that matters. In our case, it was a welcome transition. It was supported a lot by some of our foundation partners, and so it wasn't it wasn't a rough one. We were pretty blessed in that way.
That's great. So
Mhm.
I have a more personal question for you. So as an executive director, how did your educational background and experiences actually shape your approach for both the Bay Area Coalition and the National Equity Project?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was Um, so I'm from South Central Los Angeles, in California. I am a California native, and I grew up in a neighborhood um, that by the early 80s was not as safe. as some folks would call it unsafe, and where the schools had also been suffering through um, lower outcomes and proficiency rates, and mainly it was the kind of lack of safety in the late 80s or mid to late 80s in our neighborhood that had my grandmother, who I was raised with, concerned about both would I be challenged enough, is this a safe enough environment, yeah, the kind of quality of education that I would receive. And she applied for me to be bused, right, through programs that they had during that time in Los Angeles, where they were busing students of color who were in inner city Los Angeles to the San Fernando Valley. And so that busing experience actually was one of the activating experiences. It was illuminating to me to both see the difference in what I was experiencing being bused some 35 miles away from home, standing on the corner at 6 o'clock in the morning, not coming home until 5 or 6 in the evening because I was involved in other activity. And that was probably the beginning of me understanding that the right to a quality education, as we talk about it in our organization, is actually not guaranteed to everybody. And so I was placed in a humanities magnet. I was reading books. I was reading Descartes and Frantz Fanon and James Baldwin and Alice Walker. And in this humanities magnet program, which of the Black and brown students of color who were bused out there were just probably a dozen or so who were actually in this humanities magnet. And so there we were in this very diverse school, but in this humanities magnet, I was one of very few Black students in my class through ninth to 12th grade, with many experiences of being told, oh, I'm not like the other Black kids. To which I flat out defended I am actually just like the other Black kids who arrived here on the bus. And the difference is I was sitting in a class with the opportunity to read and engage in Socratic seminar, and they were not. And so it was there. It was also there that one of my teachers in our humanities magnet, Chris Miller, I will never forget this, invited me to participate in a leadership camp. And that leadership camp was hosted by the Southern Conference of Christians and Jews, which I think actually is an organization that still stands today. And it was there that I was introduced to concepts like equity and like justice, to concepts like racism and sexism, and there were and it was and that was pivotal, I think, to my leadership, to my understanding of how things came to be the way that they are, to my questioning of that, and to my advocacy for there to be a more fair, a more just, and more equitable systems. And education was the one that I had the greatest schema for, and I took kind of that passion and that commitment to college with me at UC Berkeley, and began as a co-director for the Black Recruitment and Retention Center. And again, right, began to see the structural inequity, like what young people got access to, which young people got told they should actually apply to college and which didn't. And so we, because of the recruitment and outreach efforts we ran there, we were able to bring a good percentage of Black and Brown students to Cal during that time. And then I started tutoring in open schools when I was at Cal. And so that is, I think my both curiosity and indignation around the kind of structural inequity I saw and was a part of was really probably what drove me into teaching and then into this position.
Yeah, from a young girl in South Central to now the founding director of the National Equity Project, that's an amazing evolution. And I'm sure a lot of people are very proud of you, including that teacher you mentioned that you would never forget.
Chris Miller, yeah, I was fortunate, and I think that's part of what had me move into teaching. I loved school as a kid, and as a little girl, I used to lock my cousins in the in the bedroom during the summertime, and I'm like, nobody can leave until we do this like homework, which they hated, but it was like them and my dolls. Everybody was there doing the work, so I was blessed in that regard. In that, there was always we moved around a lot I moved around a lot as a young person, but wherever I was, there was always at least one adult who saw me, who spoke encouragement to me, who pushed me, who helped me see that I was not my circumstance and that anything that I wanted to do was possible. And it sounds like corny, but part of what we know even today is that when young people don't have adults in their lives like that, right, it diminishes their capacity for thriving, for connectivity, and for them to actually navigate schooling. And so I was fortunate. I would say I was blessed. Yeah.
Just have a small follow-up question. So you mentioned that South Central wasn't exactly like an ideal educational environment back in like the 80s. Did you ever do anything with any of your organizations to go back there and try to amend some of those changes? Or is it something you want to do in the future?
I think we would, well, two things are true about that. One, we've had National Equity Project has done some work with Los Angeles Unified. Los Angeles Unified is, of course, it's the second largest public school system in the country. And I think I had always had some ambition to kind of go back to my high school, especially because I was very, very fond of my high school experience and had lots of adults in that experience who supported my growth and my development. That my high school is now a charter school, which I went back to visit a few years ago with my sons. I was like, "This is where your mom went to school." And I drove up to the gate and I was like, "Wait a minute, where is Cleveland High School?" And it's now a charter campus. So I think I would love to actually have some opportunity to do work in my neighborhood schools, right, in South Central Los Angeles. There's been lots that's evolved in Los Angeles, including kind of the presence of charters, which in some cases are outperforming some of the historical and traditional schools that were there. And in some cases are also struggling. And so I do think that there's something in me about being back in my neighborhood and supporting the educational work that's going on there. Yeah, we haven't had that opportunity yet.
That's interesting. another question more about the National Equity Project. So obviously now that you've expanded nationwide, you're faced with so many more demographics, so many more types of people. How do you ensure that you're remaining like sensitive, adaptable, considerate when you're working with people that you're not like very familiar with and like
Yeah.
different situations? Oftentimes this won't involve like inequities that are like hard to face or they're like hard to understand.
Yeah, I mean, we do that in a multitude of ways. It has been our practice to both continue studying, and to stay nimble, right? Like, and to actually understand that at all times context matters, right? And so whether we are in, Berkeley, California, right, or we go 20 miles inland, and are in Dublin or Pleasanton, those demographics are dramatically different, right? And what what surfaces as equity issues are different depending on where you are, right? And so in rural districts, the equity issues look different. So there's a part of I think there's an understanding that we hold that that context matters, that we actually are deeply respectful of people's context. We usually go in with questions, and what we talk about is empathy interviews, so that we could actually understand what people care about in a given place, what they see as obstacles, so that we can actually then frame their challenges and co-design, use our methods to kind of co-design a set of solutions that actually help people address the equities as they are experiencing them, not as we are defining them for them. And so that becomes really important. But we do, we continue to read and research, and it actually helps that we ourselves are multicultural, multilingual, intergenerational organization. And so that actually helps to close some of the experience gap, but it doesn't close all of it, right? There are times when we get to a place and we're like, we actually may not know enough here to speak with facility about what people are experiencing. And we don't try to do that. So part of our approach is to ask people to tell us their story and to share their experience with us and with each other, so that we can actually then arrive at some shared sense of what the challenge is, what people's vision for a greater or more equitable or more liberating space or context or institution is, right? It's like they define that, right? And our work is to have some methods and some practice and some strategy at supporting people to actually advance the outcomes that they're really trying to advance. But it starts usually with people telling their story, with people sharing their experience with one another, with people sharing their aspiration and sometimes their pain, doing some listening, doing some healing, and then actually really working together to figure out how they make progress on something that oftentimes seems really intractable, right? Kind of disparate outcomes by race or by gender or by, and so we let people share with us what they think the problem is that they're trying to solve, and what a vision for what that problem, once it's solved, looks like, right? To help us drive the design for whatever work we're going to do with them.
So I was wondering, when the National Equity Project starts a new initiative, is it by you first hearing the stories of other people and then deciding, okay, so we might like plan an initiative at this district or this school, or do you reach out yourselves?
We do a little bit of both. We've been fortunate in that normally people contact us, right? They either have heard from another district, another place, somebody that they trust, that we're a trusted organization. And so in that regard, we are afforded a pretty solid reputation in the field, which we do not take for granted at all. But usually people come to us and they are sharing what they're struggling with, or what the equity issue is that is really kind of up for them, that they are committed to trying to address, with their young people and with their families and communities. And we develop a scope of, and we kind of co-develop a scope of work usually, right? So we don't typically kind of stand up a particular initiative, especially in a district. We invite people. So there's one way people come to us, and we have consulting partnerships. The things that we do kind of stand up or build happen in our Center for Equity Leadership. So that's where our professional development offerings are, and people register to those, right? They're kind of open registration. Groups or individuals can register and be a part of those developmental experiences as they focus on building their own leadership capacity, or building some greater sense of awareness about the kinds of opportunities and shifts that they can make in their system to make it more equitable. And so those are the two ways. We also invite people into fellowships and host a district network. So those are the kinds of things that we build that people come to. But in people's systems, they usually come to us with requests for support, and then we co-craft how we would actually support them. Yeah.
So through all of these stories that you hear from other people and like even statistics that you've been seeing, are there any trends and inequalities that you've been noticing? Like whether it's in like one region, like this happens more often, or like through time, this is increasing, this is decreasing?
Well, this is an interesting moment in education, because there are some, I think, alarming trends to us that we're confronting right now. One is with young people and their well-being, right? And so CDC has offered a lot of data coming out of, or as we are coming through the pandemic, about the mental well-being of young people, increased rates of depression, stated loneliness, suicide ideation, anxiety and anxiousness about the future. And lots of those increases in numbers are exacerbated by gender and by race. And so that kind of data is concerning, obviously. And for the CDC to kind of name it as an epidemic that school communities should pay attention to, has also resulted in some increased funding, right, to support the emotional and mental well-being of young people, which we think is good signaling. But it also is coming at a time where, from a social and political landscape, or probably just a political landscape, there are things that we thought, battles that we thought we had already won and that we were progressing on, that are now being contested, right, by politicians, nonetheless, who are kind of choosing or trying to force like erasure and a lack of inclusion, which in some ways is adding to some anxiety and a lack of belonging for young people. So the attacks on supports and curriculum for LGBTQ youth, the exclusion and the banning of books by authors of color and gay and trans authors. I mean, I don't know that any of us would have believed that this fight would reemerge in this way at this time. And so some of that we understand as political theater and a distraction, but we actually can't ignore it, because some of the structures, some of the laws, right, policies and structures that are being put in place to banish and silence and erase history or rewrite it, right, in a way that is more palatable to white people, should be deeply concerning to all of us who care about democracy and truth and accuracy in our history. And so these things that are cropping up, across states, right, where state policy is, or at least state policy is being introduced, many times failing, which I wish actually the news would cover, like the failure of some of these attempts, but that there is such a concerted effort is deeply, deeply, deeply problematic. So we support our district colleagues to ensure that they continue to organize around a set of shared and human values for people to really understand why providing a quality education to each and every child, a truthful and accurate quality education to each and every child with support for their, not just for their academic standing, but for their social and emotional well-being is critical. It's critical for their communities thriving. It's critical for our cities. It's critical for our nation. And so we don't, lots of people don't like to kind of use war metaphors. So I'll try and stay away from it, but I can't help but feel like we are preparing ourselves for a battle that nobody actually, I think, anticipated we would be fighting it in 2023. It's one that actually everybody has a stake in. And I think that's the, trying to build social solidarity around a commitment to public education as a public good is a really important fight and a cornerstone, I think, of our democracy. So we have work to do. We have work to do. And people, folks across this country, whether they have children or not, need to have a better understanding of what's at stake if things continue to progress this way. Because our children's wellness is hanging in the balance of it, right? Our young people are watching this ridiculous parade of a show from our politicians. And it actually, I think, is contributing to the anxiousness about the future that a lot of our young people are sitting with.
It's very interesting to hear like educational equity being talked about from a social justice perspective, because being in like the educational atmosphere for so long, I can see the changes happening every day. Like I pursue scientific research and I'm very involved in like college environments. So just being affirmative action being overruled, seeing that right not being contested one day and the next day being contested, like that was a very strange transition. And I was just wondering, with all of these changes happening in like both the political atmosphere and the social atmosphere, how does the National Equity Project kind of adapt to those? Do you change your initiatives for the year? Do you prioritize some things over others?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think we try to stay responsive, right? Stay responsive to what's happening in the context, ensure that our methods and our services and support to leaders, and I kind of mean that we talk about leadership taking responsibility for what matters to you, because inside that definition, we feel like anyone, right, can lead. But we try to respond not by shifting our kind of core commitment to what we're trying to do, right? But trying to make sure that what we're offering is actually resonating and meeting a need in the field. And so sometimes we may offer workshops and new services because we're understanding that people are experiencing, particular kinds of affronts or attacks, and we have to stand back and say, what what do our leaders need to be able to stand in this gap, right, between where we are and where folks are committed to going. What do they need by way of skill? What do they need by way of like just some sacred community? Sometimes people just need to actually be able to be in a space, release enough emotion to get clear thinking about what is their kind of next most elegant step, right, in this work, and for people to see this as, to see the kind of long game that this is, right. And so yeah, I think we try to respond in ways that help people stand in this moment and continue to lead for what they know is right, and to be able to organize more people around them toward a greater good, you know. And so yes, I think we offer different services based on sometimes kind of the, not usually based on the national context. This feels like an anomaly. Like in the 20 plus years that I've been doing this work, we've not experienced anything quite this aggressive, right? In the opposite direction of where we thought we were trying to move. So that is causing us to have a lot of conversation about what folks need to continue to navigate this really kind of turbulent time.
I was wondering, is there a distinct memory or situation in your mind where it was like an extreme success story, like you put effort and you like put investments into this one initiative and it gave a product that was like really rewarding for you? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I feel like because we are a leadership development and organizational change, like systems change organization, I feel like there are hundreds of leaders in my mind and in my heart who have inspired and led, and that we feel grateful that we had some hand to play in their development, in positioning them as leaders of new school communities, of their work. So there are many people who come to mind whose leadership has impacted and continue to impact schools and neighborhoods who are flourishing and whose young people are flourishing under their charge. And so I think leaders like Yatunde Reeves, who is a principal now at Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School. She's now on the East Coast, but was here in Oakland when we were doing new school development work as a partner to Oakland Unified School District. And there are so many, Hasten Kim, like leaders who've gone on to run schools or run charter management organizations or districts as superintendents or chief academic officers. So our leadership development work is cornerstone. It is the way that we support and build people's capacity to actually make the kinds of cultural and structural changes in their system. And so there are many leaders that I'm proud of. And there are some efforts that we are proud of, with school communities still standing, that were initiated and built by teachers and parents and caregivers and young people, right? School communities that are still performing really powerfully, that we're very proud to have supported the building of that school as an idea, and then supported the implementation of that school's first 3 to 5 years. And so yeah, there are many things that many people, and I think many efforts that we look back on and have learned a great deal from, but also feel a great source of pride about the role that we helped to play.
I'm very glad. The impact of your organization and you as a person is astounding, and I'm glad that you were able to achieve the outcomes that you're looking for. So, kind of as a concluding question, since we're almost near the end of our interview, I just wanted to ask about the future goals of the National Equity Project. So, looking into the future, what are some of the most exciting, invigorating, or important, like needed projects that the organization is going to be pursuing in the coming months or coming years?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think coming out of the pandemic, we were really hopeful that that as an educational community, we would hold open this moment when all of the structures of schooling as we know it had fallen away, right? The things that nobody thought we could ever do that were all, just suddenly there wasn't a child in the country who was in a school building. And that the coming back would provide an opportunity to both learn some things from what it meant to engage so radically different, right, than we could at school. We thought that we would have this great opportunity to rethink and redesign the aspects of the schooling experience that just weren't working for hundreds and thousands of children. It's not that schooling is not just not working for Black and Brown young people, right? But that the incidence of but that they aren't working for many young people. And I think that we're still hopeful, although the pressure to kind of bring school back as quickly as possible and just get the trains back on the track, like we understand where some of that urgency came from. And it came at a cost, right? It came at a cost of our creativity. It came at a cost of like providing spaces for grieving when young people came back, like, the whole world had, we had a shared experience that was global. And we had a moment, and I think we're hopeful that we still have a moment where we evolve our understanding of what what schooling needs and should look like as we move into the 22nd century. Like we have to rethink it. And so we are hopeful to be a part of a national movement and investment and a reinvestment, right, in the redesigning of schooling. I think that is one of the more promising things that we can do in public education right now is really kind of fundamentally rethink and redesign our schooling in ways that allow young people to be well known, to be safe physically and psychologically, to be challenged and to be curious, and for their work to have meaning, and for their cultures and identities, their multiple identities, to be affirmed. And for us to understand that learning actually happens everywhere, not just in the classroom, and so that we can break down some walls so that young people could actually have more and more experience in I'd say in the real world, but in the world, period. And to incorporate, which we have not done a great job of, incorporating science and technology that is going to shift how we forever think about education. And so we can't fight that. We actually have to lean into it and think about new ways of learning together. And so that is, I feel like, the opportunity. And the question is, will we be brave enough to go there?
That was an incredible note to end this interview off on. I just wanted to say, LaShawn, I know that I personally learned so much, not just about the complexities of inequity, but also about what we as society need to do and what ideologies we need to like hold in within ourselves to actually move towards the better goals. And I know that everyone's who's watching this video is also incredibly inspired by you. So I just wanted to thank you again, and I wish you the best of luck in all your future endeavors, both individually and with the National Equity Project.
Oh, thank you, Rishika. I wish you the same.